grammar, logic, and rhetoric. We've talked about logic and rhetoric. What about grammar then? Where does this fall into our curriculum?
Well, we definitely continue to deal with it in Traditio Nostra and in the Trivium study sequence because we deal in language.
Yeah.
But I would return the question to you to give comment about it, because I'd say we would agree that it's found, or it's nested most completely.
It's true.
In the logic program.
Yeah.
In the Latin program.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment, and which is interesting because it shows that there's a connection between our language programs and the trivium studies. They go hand in hand in some ways.
Right.
And so, yeah, it is through the Latin program that we have an emphasis upon basically familiarizing ourselves with, if we go back to that hammer metaphor, the nails, the boards, the substances that make up the structure of language. And that's what the beauty of studying language, Latin, can do, is it can familiarize the student with the syntax, the way language works, even especially by studying a foreign language. I've found, and I'm sure that you found too, as studying foreign languages, that one can best understand one's own language by studying another language. And the structure of Latin does well to do that. It's concise. It follows patterns that are regular for the most part, and that enables students to learn syntax, then apply it to their own language, and to be able to see how English syntax works. I feel like there's 2 points in my life that I really understood grammar. It was one when I was in the 8th grade and diagramming sentences.
Sure.
Which was to the bane of most students, but I really felt like I learned English grammar at that point to some degree. The second time I feel like it was when I took Latin in college. It forced me to be able to understand these building blocks and how it all fits together. And then, it tells me their roles and how you arrange it. It didn't teach me logic though. I mean, that's why logic's necessary, right?
Right.
Because logic will show me how to arrange those to make true statements, right?
Right.
But grammar is the study of knowing how they fit together in coherent ways to be able to, ultimately communicate too. So yes, it's Latin that fits into our curriculum in that way. It teaches the student to understand grammar. It gives them a better understanding of English grammar by studying another language. And so that's really the strength of the program. Interestingly, also though, why we would study Latin too, though, is it is the language of the church. It is the language of our prayer. It's our prayer language that we have in the West. So, yes, students, learn how grammar works through Latin and how English grammar works through Latin. But yet, they also learn the expression of prayer in Latin, which has influenced thousands of years of the West. And it was Pope Benedict when he found a pontifical college for the study of Latin. He very famously, he made the note that Christianity was entrusted with the keys of the Latin language. As the Roman Empire crumbled from within, the Latin was handed over to the Christians. And the Christians then took those keys, or took that language, and they built upon it, and they used it as the means of communicating the ideas, the knowledge, the wisdom of the West. It really is a gateway. It's a gateway for us as readers to access the knowledge of the past. So Latin connects to Traditio Nostra in that way. It connects to our study of the past and the ideas of the past, the literature of the past, through the language that they penned it in. And it connects to the trivium through the means of grammar. So Yes, and what makes our program distinct, I think, for is one, I think this perspective, right? We see Latin as directly, communicating with the trivium and as a part of the trivium. And we see Latin as this gateway to the ideas of the past. That's a part of our program that's distinct. And then the methodology of the program, I think, fosters an environment where students are able to really learn those two things, or I guess make best use of them. So, for example, we want to immerse kids in the language of Latin. So we encourage the memorization of many Latin prayers, and kids memorize Latin, the language, so they're able to internalize it and to be taught from it in that way. We also expose kids to Latin that was composed thousands of years ago instead of something that was written in 1975.
Sure, for
which,
the textbook.
For the textbook that you're using. This again just allows kids to familiarize themselves with a different way, the way of thinking of the Romans and the Christians, and which makes a difference. And so that approach really, I think, enables kids to learn grammar and also to see the connection to history and the connection of ideas.
That's very neat that that there are these three main courses, and Latin does, in an interesting way, kind of take up this middle ground, connecting to both of the other two. With the great book's historical sequence, it is about taking the kids into the minds of the past, and it serves this function in a profound way because, the linguistic idioms of an author can't be separated from the ideas in the end. And that's one of the things we'd love to overcome with it, like a great books course, is that you have to deal with so many things in translation. And so this helps to overcome that, to really bring them as close to the minds of the authors as you could get. And then at the same time, it is fulfilling this function within the trivium sequence as the basic grammar course.
Yeah, you're right. It really is the closest way to impart an idea from the author is to read it in its original language. Because when you read something in translation, even though it's good, and you are honestly relying upon the understanding of a middle person, a middleman, to be able to have correctly interpreted something and to then teach you that way. What if they got it wrong? What if they... Now, fortunately, we have very sophisticated people producing translations and all that.
But it's unavoidable, at least to some degree. The greater they are, the less so, to be sure.
But some things are just completely... You cannot express in a translation. There's no way to create a one-to-one correlation. Just because of the differences of modes of expression, culture, such and such.
And the physical qualities of the language are lost no matter what.
Absolutely.
In poetry or prose that has that internal rhyme or whatever it might be. That at best could be kind of imitated, but you couldn't replicate the thing itself.
You can't really know why Virgil was great until you read Virgil in Latin. You read the Aeneid, and you see the structure of the Aeneid, how metrically everything fits within very concise units, for thousands of lines of poetry. And the care and the beauty of the artfully placing the words in different places for emphasis and to communicate different ideas. You can't get that in a translation. So that's the hope. The hope is to be able to do two things with the student. One, to teach students grammar so they can do everything that we talked about within the trivium, so that they can come to the knowledge of truth, so that they can attain wisdom, and so that they can then also communicate truth and to do all that connects within the trivium. That's the one hand. On the one hand, that's their goal, and the second, on the other hand, it's to allow the student to appreciate and to see and to read or these works of literature that have shaped the world that we live in the language that they were composed in, to get as close to the ideas of the authors as we possibly can. And not just the ideas, I guess you'd say the prayers too.
Certainly,
their prayers.
certainly, yeah. I mean, it's a point you made that we are the Roman Rite, and the language of the Rite is Latin, and so it takes us deeper into that most important of prayers in the church, but then also all the other prayers that we learn.
Yeah.
And a further point to be made in that regard is just that to do theology or to do any of these other activities at a higher level later on will require this facility with Latin.
Yeah.
There's so much more from the High Middle Ages that hasn't been translated.
Yes.
Even has, and it's.
And that's what is shocking to me.
Yeah,
just to look at, let's say we say St. Bonaventure, right?
Mm-hmm.
How many of his works are not translated, or your Lombard? There's not much translated. St. Thomas, yes, but when you look at all these gems and jewels that have not they have not been rendered into English, which is it's invaluable.
Yeah, we need to churn out a lot of translators.
Yeah, I know. We'll let them produce those so that everybody else can read it. Because the fear is that those ideas are lost.
Right.
And
this makes me too, I just think again of the fact that we aren't, however, trying to necessarily create professional theologians.
No.
But what we want to get back to is this idea of someone who is going to go be a computer programmer or some such thing, having the wherewithal to do theology and to translate and to spend their times in these rich tasks which are really what are the basis of culture.
Yeah.
And not to fall into the modern error of thinking that you only do that if that's sort of your career.
Yes.
And limiting ourselves in some way to imagining that a job is what defines us. These are, we should all be writing poetry. We should all be, singing songs and reading theology and doing all of these things that the beauties of our the blessing of being born into the cultural situation that we have been should be taken advantage of.
Yeah, exactly. It always strikes me how we kind of shortchange ourselves as far as our creativity in that way, right? We limit creativity in our imagination because we don't allow for the computer scientists to pursue those things in our educational structures. Now, obviously, people have broken down beyond that, but it does seem like there are shackles on us educationally within what has become the modus operandi of Western education. That severely...
They're cultural shackles.
They are cultural shackles. They limit people to see those things.
Right.
Because it would be foolish for us to think that you don't need logic or grammar when you're programming a computer. That's all computers can really understand is grammar, syntax, and logic. And it would be foolish for us to think that the truth that you can come to through the study of the trivium wouldn't bear upon how well we do these things too. Right?
Yeah, so it's like it flows both ways.
It does.
It does contribute to the doing of those tasks, but it also liberates you from limiting yourself to those tasks.
It does.
So that you can produce other things.
Yeah, it does. And again, kind of this theme that we have talking about is it's almost beauty in the end then that we're searching after. A beautiful thing, through producing poetry, through and allowing all and encouraging everybody to seek beauty. And that's another one of the the marvels of the trivium is that it pursues beauty.
Mhm.
The dis, it encourages students to pursue beauty.
By tying them back to the real, by helping them to become virtuous, by
Yeah.
doing this myriad of things.